Welcome everyone, I'm Bigfoot. Today we are going to talk about maildrops, we're going to talk about food drops, and bouncing boxes. Alright, so why would you do a maildrop anyway? Well, the most popular reason is there is a poor resupply or limited resupply at whatever town that you're in. The next reason is you have some sort of special diet, or you want to keep to some sort of nutritional diet on the trail that you can't find in the stores. The next, you are changing your gear, or you're sending yourself a new piece of gear like a new pair of shoes. You'll have to mail yourself that. Another reason would be you want to avoid resupplying in a trail town, whether that's just because you don't want to get off the trail, or you are trying to cut down some time from a speed aspect, and you're just putting yourself in a position where you can resupply right on the trail, like at a hostel or something that's very close to the trail. So I said food drops. What is a food drop? Well, a food drop would be a situation where you have a predetermined location that a company or someone is actually going to go out and drop a portion of your food down. Now, why would you do this? Well, there are a couple of situations that I'll tell you a little bit later that might be valid reasons why you might do this. And you would do this because it's obviously going to decrease a lot of the weight in your pack, because food is the heaviest thing out there. And then you'd be able to avoid going way off the trail to resupply. And then bounce boxes. Well, starting off, what is a bounce box? It's basically a way for a hiker to be able to bounce something from one location to another location up the trail. So the first reason, and the most popular reason why you do this, is you have a piece of gear that you don't need at the current time. Usually it's like weather related, and you want to have it for later on down the trail. Maybe it's before you get into the White Mountains and you start seeing those 4,000 to 6,000 foot elevations again. The next, you can't stop by so you send yourself a mail drop, and for whatever reason you can't make the time to pick it up, or you can't stop in that town. You can actually bounce that box ahead to another town that's more convenient for you. There are some special circumstances that some hikers will bounce boxes from one town to the next in certain sections, because there's a piece of equipment or a piece of gear that they don't want to carry on the trail and they want to have in town. An example of this is there's a hiker a couple years ago that did this with a computer, a laptop, and basically just bounced it, I believe, every couple hundred miles up the trail, and then they were just using that to edit their videos because they wanted a certain software to be able to do that, and post them on their YouTube channel. And the last reason would be you're in a town, you're resupplying, and you buy too much food, or maybe there's just a big bulk of food, or there's something special that you like there that you didn't see in the trail, and you take that extra food, you throw it in a priority box, and you bounce it up the trail for another town that maybe doesn't have the best resupply. All right, so that just about wraps up why we would be doing mail drops and food drops and bouncing packages up the trail. But what are the reasons why we wouldn't want to? Well, the first is cost. It's going to cost you money for postage on obviously the mail drops and to bounce packages. That could add up quite a bit. And doing food drops can get kind of expensive as well. You're paying someone to drop food out in a certain location, and depending on the outfitter or the hostel or whomever it is, can get kind of costly. All right, the next reason why we wouldn't be doing any of these is for logistics. If we're saying to a post office, the post office is only open certain hours. They're not open Sundays, they close early on Saturdays, and they're only open limited hours Monday through Friday. Now, the other locations like hostels and places like that, usually they're going to be open, for extended hours, sometimes even 24 hours. But that is going to be something that you're going to have to work around. Your plans, they may change. Heck, they change all the time. So you might have a package sitting somewhere at a hostel, and all of a sudden you're not going to that hostel anymore, or more specifically, you're not stopping in that town anymore. So your plans could change, and that would throw a wrench in the plans of where you sent your package. It's kind of a commitment to be stopping at that particular location. So I talked about your plans might change. Well, when you are sending a package, not so much to the post office because you can bounce the package ahead, but if you are sending them to anywhere else, that package is locked into that area. And if your plans change, your obligation there to be there, if that changes, then you're kind of out of luck. So you're obligated for stopping in that area, and that could be a big deterrent. All right, so you know the benefits and the advantages, you know the disadvantages. Well, let's talk about mail drops and where are there some of the areas or towns that might benefit you to actually send a mail drop. So I get this question a lot, and I actually personally did do a few mail drops myself during the course of the trail. The majority of my mail drops are actually done in the first few hundred miles, but looking back at the trail, there are definitely some areas that I feel have advantages with sending a mail drop. My first resupply is Neal Gap. The mile marker for Neal Gap in the 2016 AWOL guide is mile marker 31.7. Now the reason why I say Neal Gap is for a couple of reasons. Number one, most folks are going to be doing the approach trail, which is 8.8 miles. So really that's about at mile marker 40 for you. The second reason is the next resupply point is Helen or Hiawassee, and that's at mile marker 52.9, so call it 53. So when you add the 8 miles on that, you're looking at over 60 miles. This is your first resupply. For most folks, they're probably only going to be doing like 7 to 10 miles a day, and carrying a whole week, maybe even 8 days worth of food for some of those folks is just not going to work. So Neal Gap is a good, safe place to be able to send a food drop, especially if you are not sure that you're going to be going over 7 or 8 miles to start off. Now, the other thing about Neal Gap is there's no tobacco there, so if you're a smoker, you're going to want to probably send something out there because some folks won't be able to make it that long without any tobacco either. All right, so the next place that I got on my list is the NOC, and this is kind of debatable for the NOC. So the NOC is at mile marker 137.3. There's not anything in town to really resupply at. There is a outfitter that's got some things, but really the things that are there are places to eat. There's a place that you can stay at a hostel, and then of course the outfitter. So the main resupply point, a major one that's right before that is Franklin, North Carolina. Everyone's probably going to stop in Franklin. It's a popular trail town, and it has great resupply. That's at mile marker, call it 110. So the NOC is only 27 miles from Franklin, but the problem is the next spot that you'd be able to get a food drop or do a resupply is Fontana Dam, and that's at mile marker 165. So if you can't go 55 miles and make it last, then you probably need to do a resupply at the NOC. Going into my next resupply, Fontana Dam, it's probably the most popular one that there is on the trail. And there is a general store in town in Fontana Village, but it is really expensive. So I would recommend doing a mail drop at the Fontana Dam. And what I would suggest actually is to do your resupply in Franklin. And now that by that time you would have about 110 miles under your belt, you'll start to get an understanding of like what's working, what's not, and some of your tastes will change by that time. So I would probably wait until you get into Franklin to decide what you want to do for a resupply at Fontana Dam, unless if you're going on some sort of speed pace like I was last year. You'd have enough time to be able to get what you want at Franklin and go to the post office and then bounce it up to Fontana Dam's post office, and then you'd actually have basically food that you know that you're going to want to eat instead of doing it before you actually start your hike. All right, so the next place I'd send a resupply is actually where I personally did send a resupply. So before I talk about it, you just got resupplied at Fontana Dam. You're heading into the Smokies. This is the first big hurdle in the southern Appalachians, is getting through the Smoky Mountains. The Smoky Mountains are close to 80 miles long. I think it's about 75 miles from Fontana Dam to Davenport Gap. You only have one chance that you can resupply in the Smokies, and that's at Gatlinburg. You would get to Gatlinburg from the only road that will cross the AT in the Smokies, which is Newfound Gap. So if you are willing to want to go to Gatlinburg, and if you've never been there, it's a great town. It is a little bit of a tourist trap. The lodging I hear is on the cheaper side, but there's people everywhere. and it's good to be able. It's easy to get lost there for a few days. Really fun, but if you want to avoid that, you don't have any other option in that entire 80-mile stretch. So what I did is I actually sent a resupply package because I was under the speed piece, and I just didn't have time to go 15 or 20 miles off trail to get to Gatlinburg. Not to mention, by the way, Gatlinburg you can't hitch. It's one of the few places on the AT that you can't hitch. So getting back could be an issue. But anyway, I sent a resupply to Standing Bear Farm, the hostel that's just past Davenport Gap. And it's about an 80-mile stretch that you have to go, which, you know, for me wasn't an issue. The hostel at Standing Bear Farm was probably the least organized hostel that I saw with how they handled resupply packages. They just threw them in a big room, and you were just there to fend for yourself. I could have grabbed any person's resupply package if I want. I didn't hear anybody having any complaints that they lost theirs, but I would be surprised if there wasn't. So anyway, so you have that option if you want to avoid Newfound Gap. Now, the only thing I want to mention to everyone, and you don't hear about this a lot, is between Fontana Dam and Hot Springs. Hot Springs is at mile marker 273, and again, Fontana Dam, we'll call it 165. Gatlinburg is the only place to resupply in that 110-ish mile stretch. So even if you do go to Gatlinburg, depending on how many miles you're putting in, you might still need to have a resupply between Newfound Gap at 207 and Hot Springs at 273. If you're not hiking as fast or as strong, you might need to send a resupply to Standing Bear Farm. So anyway, a lot going on in that stretch, but I wanted to make sure that you're aware of that area and the limited resupply options that there is, and why I suggest that Standing Bear Farm would be a good place for a resupply. All right, the next on my list is Bland, Virginia. So Bland, Virginia is nestled in between two major resupplies. One is Marion at mile marker 532, and the other is Harrisburg at 634. Virtually every single hiker that I ran into resupplied at those two areas. So it's a 104-mile stretch, and chances are at this time you're probably not going to be able to make it over 100 miles without resupplying. So Bland, Virginia is really the only spot in between that stretch. There are a couple of spots, but they're just not good. Like there's Atkins, and that's 12 miles past Marion. I don't know why you would do that anyway, except for it's just literally right off the trail. You walk through Atkins. And the other is Trent's Grocery. It's just off the trail, and it's a gas station. It's got a few things like pesticides and stuff, but you know, it is what it is. So anyway, Bland, Virginia. The resupply at Bland, Virginia is not a grocery store. It's a Dollar General. So if you're cool with the Dollar General, then go ahead and resupply there. I did, and I was fine. But if you don't want to resupply at a Dollar General, that might be a town that you want to send a food drop to. All right, the sixth town that I have on my list is Harpers Ferry. Very popular destination, probably one of the most popular trail towns on the Appalachian Trail. And there are a lot of things in Harpers Ferry. There's lots of places to eat, there's lots of shops, there's lots of history. Lots to do in Harpers Ferry. A lot of hikers also are going to take the train and go to Washington, D.C. If you're doing this, you don't need to resupply in Harpers Ferry, and you wouldn't want it anyway. You would resupply out in D.C. However, if you are banking on resupplying in Harpers Ferry, there's not a lot of great options, unless if you want to try to find someone that can drive you to a grocery store. I did hear about one, but it was I don't even know if it was in Harpers Ferry. If it was really far off the trail. So Harpers Ferry could be a good place for you to send another mail drop. All right, so you pass the halfway point. There's a couple areas that I just wanted everyone to be aware of that were difficult for me resupplying because they just didn't have a lot of options. Number one is like the whole state of New York. New York just had really crummy resupply options. Almost every town that you go through or go by are just small, and they just have cafes or delis and things like that. You can resupply at those kind of places, but the options just aren't great, and it's just a lot of junk food. Now, one place I did not go to was Bear Mountain. You actually walk right through Bear Mountain, which is like the zoo and everything, and when you cross over the Hudson, I believe there's a couple of resupply options there. When I went through that area, it was literally like 9 o'clock at night, and I never had an opportunity to see what was there. So there could be some better options there, but other than that, New York really stunk. Past New York, Hanover, when you get into New Hampshire, there is only one place to resupply, and that's at the co-op, the Hanover co-op. And the co-op there was just really expensive. it had pretty much everything you would need in a resupply. I don't remember finding anything that I couldn't, but I paid a lot of extra for resupplying there. And honestly, you probably could save money or almost even break even if you sent a mail drop there and paid the postage than what you spent at the Hanover Co-op. So if you find a grocery store that has a lot of things that you just really, really like, it would probably be the same with spending the money on the food and bouncing it up to Hanover and just basically picking it up in Hanover. All right, my last resupply is the famous Monson. So if you're heading northbound, this is going to be your last town that you're going to see on the AT. If you're heading southbound, it's going to be the first one. And it's on the cuff of the 100-mile wilderness. There is only a few places to resupply in Monson. It's at Shaw's Place, which is a hostel, Pete's Place, which is kind of like a deli, and then there's a convenience store. You're not going to have a lot of options here, and you're going to pay for it. So this might be one of those places that would benefit paying the postage and sending the food up so you actually have a good variety, and honestly, you would probably save even a little bit of money after the postage. So Monson would be the last place that I would send a resupply. All right, so that wraps up all the places that I would send a mail drop to on the Appalachian Trail. Again, depending on what kind of circumstances that there were. But if I did it again, those would be the things that would stand out to me. The next thing I want to talk about are food drops. I mentioned it earlier. There are really two areas that if anywhere, I would send and do a food drop. Number one is the Smokies. So in the Smokies, there's actually a hostel called Cabin in the Woods that will not only take you to a decent resupply, they are located just before Fontana Dam. So if you stay here, you wouldn't have to worry about sending a resupply package to Fontana Dam. But they'll take you to a decent resupply, and you would buy enough food where they actually would take and drop a portion of your food at Newfound Gap. Now you would only do this, the food drop, that is, if you weren't going to Gatlinburg. But you wouldn't have to carry all the weight of the food, and you basically have a resupply right there on the trail. Now the cost of this is a little expensive. I think it's like $65, but there are people that do it, and this would be one of the two areas that would make sense. Now the other area that would make sense actually is in the 100-mile wilderness. There's a lot of misconceptions in the 100-mile wilderness. There's actually a lot more areas to access and get in there than people think. There are a lot of logging roads that you will pass through there, and as a matter of fact, I ran into a guy, his name is Buddy, while I was staying in Monson, and he actually, so first of all, he knows the 100-mile wilderness like the back of his hand. He knows every single mile of the wilderness, and he actually does a lot of slack packing and food drops in this 100-mile wilderness. He's cheaper than, I believe, the shuttle service that might offer this in that area, and he's just a really nice guy. So I'll put his contact information. I have his cell phone number that he gave me, and I'll put that in the comments, or excuse me, in the details of this video below. So if you want that, but I would definitely leverage Buddy because he can help you out there in Monson. But between those two areas, those would really be the only areas that I would do a food drop in on the AT. All right, everyone, that wraps up this video. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you found it valuable. Stay tuned for my next sighting, and remember to always follow Bigfoot to prepare you for your next adventure.